I am Jess Behrens. I am a social worker by license, and I am the Caregiver Support Program Manager at the St. Cloud VA. I have actually been with Caregiver Support for about 12 and a half years now at the VA, and have watched the program that we run grow from myself as sort of a one-woman show to we now have a staff of 13. Yeah, so VA is really putting a lot of emphasis on recognition that caregivers of veterans, caregivers of anyone really, need a great deal of support. And over the last couple years, VA has put a particular emphasis on respite care and recognizing the importance of respite care and helping caregivers understand what it is and encouraging caregivers to utilize it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I have disclosures up here that I have to put up here, that I have no financial relationships with any entities, and that any redistribution of this without my permission is prohibited. So, boring. Okay, objectives. So our objective today is to recognize positive and or negative impacts of caregiving. Now, these are not things that are going to be new to you, but I really do think it's important that we name them and acknowledge them, because a lot of people feel these things but don't necessarily make recognition of the fact that they are related to their caregiving. We're also going to talk about 3 different types of respite, and we are going to talk about a tool that you actually have in your packets called the VA Caregiver Respite Tool that will help you begin a respite plan. Now, the tool that's in there does talk specifically about veterans, what are the veterans' needs, that sort of a thing, but it is very translatable even if the person you are caring for is not a veteran. So just take the language in there with a grain of salt and know that the tool itself is really good regardless. So the health and well-being impact of caregiving. Any of these look familiar to any of you? Signs of caregiver stress and burnout. Feeling burdened or worrying all the time, feeling tired, sleeping too much or sleeping not enough, gaining or losing weight, becoming easily irked or angry, losing interest in activities you used to enjoy or feeling sad, having other health concerns that maybe you didn't have before, such as frequent headaches, maybe misusing alcohol or prescription or other drugs, and missing your own medical appointments. Now, I read these very specifically because some of you, if you are familiar with mental health at all, you may look at this and say, gosh, that looks a lot like diagnostic criteria for depression. And that is true. It does not mean that caregiver stress equates to depression, but a lot of them look the same. I just want to take a poll here of the caregivers in the room. Anybody ever experience one of these? Yep. Anybody experience half or more of them? Anybody experience all or all but 1 or 2 of them? Yeah. That does not surprise me. It breaks my heart, but it does not surprise me because caregiving has a lot of these impacts on individuals. Here's some stats that I do want you to be aware of. 14.5% of caregivers in a study, I'm sorry, I think that was a CDC study, indicated that they experienced 4 or more mentally unhealthy days in the last month. That's almost half. And 17.6% of caregivers reported experiencing 14 or more physically unhealthy days in the past month. So these are large amounts of caregivers that are having either physical or mental health impacts for themselves. And then, as you may remember from the last slide, they are not always seeking or following through with their own medical appointments. And a big part of that is maybe lack of energy to do so, prioritizing their individual's care. Please forgive me if I say veteran instead of individual. It's just so built into my lexicon. But the individual that they're caring for, that maybe you just don't want to spend another minute in a doctor's office. So, and also then 36.7% of caregivers reported getting insufficient sleep. Hands raised, anybody feel like you don't get enough sleep here? Yeah, I would say that's a pretty good number there. I do also have some statistics on military caregivers here and some additional stressors that they have. But I think ultimately what it comes right down to is caregiving is a tough, tough job. As I mentioned, that first slide about impacts of stress, or the stress and burden of caregiving, a lot of those symptoms do align with symptoms of depression. And various studies indicate that 40 to 70% of caregivers experience some of those symptoms of depression, with approximately a quarter of them meeting diagnostic criteria for major depression. And caregivers are shown to have increased alcohol and other substance use as perhaps a coping skill for managing that stress. And this is a really important fact in the blue here, is that 30.7% of unpaid caregivers, based on a CDC survey, reported thinking seriously about suicide in the past 30 days prior to that study. 30.7 reported thinking seriously about suicide in the past 30 days. This is really important, and I know that this is a really hard statistic to think about, but I mention it in the context of a conversation about respite because I want you to be aware of this for yourself so that you know that that is a risk that caregiving has. And that I want you to watch out for each other. Sometimes we don't see that in ourselves, and one of the things that's really important for caregiving is that you are getting connected with other caregivers such as yourselves, and I hope you'll look out for each other, and you'll ask that question if you have a concern. VA has a ton of resources on suicide prevention and how do you ask that question, to help people who are not mental health professionals interrupt or address potential suicide. So we can certainly offer those as well, but I mention this because I want you to watch out for each other, I want you to watch out for yourselves, and I want you to get to your own medical appointments and tell your doctor if you are experiencing sadness, if you're experiencing anxiety, because there are things that can help and address that. And it's really important to make sure that the people who help take care of your health help keep you on the right track, because sometimes it can be hard for you to do that yourselves. Now, that's a lot of kind of sad, dark stuff, and I feel we need to do that. Like I said, I think it's really important to name it and identify it and not let that just become the dark, shadowed part of caregiving that people don't necessarily recognize. But I think there are also positive impacts of caregiving. And based on a lot of different studies, again, we've heard things like increased self-confidence. Caregivers are doing things that they didn't necessarily know they could do. I hear from so many caregivers things like, well, I had to watch a YouTube video of how to figure out how to fix the dryer, but now I know how to fix the dryer. Anybody ever have to do something like that? Just figure out how to do something you haven't done before because that's your job now? Yeah. Fulfillment from helping others. There certainly is a huge benefit to your own self-worth if you are providing support and love to somebody who needs it. Hopefully, you are also establishing social networks and friendship groups that are associated with caregiving. events like this, or support groups, or education groups, or even finding a friend who's also a caregiver and shooting text messages back and forth with each other. You're building some of those networks, and those are positive impacts as well. As I mentioned, learning and developing new skills and feeling needed and useful is also a reported positive impact. Has anybody here experienced any of those positive impacts? I'm seeing some hands up, thank you. This is a really important recognition. I always put this in there, that diverse caregiver populations have different stressors related to caregiving. And so it's important to recognize that there are different experiences with caregiving based on an individual's culture and based on many, many different parts of individuals' lives. So let's get to the point then. What is respite? Anybody here use some kind of respite? Oh my goodness, y'all. Let's talk about this, because respite is so important. And I want you to think about these three things about what respite is. First of all, respite is normal and necessary. It is necessary. What respite kind of is defined as is this short period of rest or relief. So somebody who can take over for you so you are not necessarily working 24/7, 365. It's time off, time away, or a little bit of a break. We're going to talk about some ways to do that, both formal and informal respite. But again, coming back, it is normal, it is necessary. I want you to think about school kids. They go to school, they get a lunch break and recess. Football game has halftime, right? Everybody needs a break. If you were working a regular 9-to-5 type job, you'd probably have some kind of annual leave, or you'd have weekends off. Caregiving does not inherently have a break, am I right? Most of the time, caregiving does not have a break built into it. So we want to recognize that respite is not selfish and it is not a luxury. It is a necessity as a part of this role. It's not personal care services, so it's different than if you have somebody coming in to assist with perhaps bathing or getting somebody dressed. It's different than that. And it's not a one-size-fits-all plan. We can't just pop every individual into an adult day health care or have somebody come into the home for every single individual. It just doesn't work that way. It's not one size fits all. So it's really important to think about what does work for you and the individual you're caring for, and that is certainly going to change over the course of your caregiving journey. So respite is going to support the whole caregiver. Anybody here ever feel like your whole identity is being a caregiver? Some hands up. I'm glad that most of you are still feeling like you have other parts of that identity, because that is really important. A lot of folks that we talk to, or some folks that we talk to, often feel like they get so wrapped up in that caregiving role that they lose pieces of themselves. They lose parts of the physical things that they used to like to do. They lose parts of their spiritual self, their ability to interact, maybe with social selves, with their social self, such as family, friends, getting out and working with that network. Respite is intended to help you look at yourself as a whole person and to give you time to address the things that you are missing. Because everybody has parts of themselves that are, in here. And I'm sorry, I can't read all of them exactly because I made the font too small for myself. But recognize that all of these components of yourself are part of your health. So VA has a really big focus on whole health and thinking about what is important to you in regards to your health. And that is not just your physical health. Whole health is not just, taking more steps and eating more carrots. Whole health also has to do with your emotional, spiritual, social health and the things that really make the most importance to you to improve your quality of life. So what are the benefits of respite? I think some people think it's obvious what respite supports folks with, but it is a little nuanced in terms of what respite can do. So here's some things that caregivers may benefit from if they have respite. So again, they have time to care for their whole selves, those pieces where they might feel that they have some things missing in what fulfills them. It helps reduce caregiver burnout and stress because you do get that break. You do get that time to care for yourself. You do get that time to go to your own medical appointments. And if you're managing your own medical stuff, hopefully you'll have less pain or whatever the case may be to reduce that stress as well. It may benefit in having a greater level of self-compassion when you're thinking about yourself as a caregiver. I have found in my 12 and a half years working in this field that caregivers tend to evaluate their own performance as a caregiver very harshly. If you can't do everything and you can't meet every need perfectly, that a lot of times folks take that on themselves, when the reality is there's just no possible way that you can do everything perfectly all the time. But when you have a chance to take some respite, we do see that those caregivers who access and take advantage of respite are able to have a little bit more self-compassion. And resilience is really an important part of caregiving as well, because you have to think about being able to bounce back from those challenges that caregiving is going to throw in your way, and respite helps sustain that. So what are some types of respite? Now, self-guided respite is kind of level 1 respite. This is the sort of thing that you can do without anybody else, without spending any money, without taking any time away or finding anybody else to sit down with the individual you're caring for. This is the practice of building some sort of self-focused activity into everyday routines. So it's making sure that you have something that is about you every day. And so this is individualized to what makes sense to you, right? I could tell you all to take 15 minutes every day and do some deep breathing and guided imagery, and some of y'all are gonna love that, and some of y'all are gonna look at me like I have lost my mind. Some of you are more active, perhaps, and you wanna take 15 minutes to go out in the garden. Of course, we're losing time for that now, but in gardening weather, you might want to do that. It might be making social connections. So maybe it's not 15 minutes or an hour all at one time, but maybe it's making sure you have that person that you can text with throughout the day, whether that's a friend or a family member, or maybe you exchange silly jokes with, a best friend or something like that. Maybe if you have a spiritual practice, you take some time for that and make sure that that is a priority in your day. And it could just be taking 5 minutes to yourself to relax. So this is a form of respite. It is a form of respite because it allows you, again, to focus on that whole self, to recognize the areas that you need to help keep yourself healthy and whole. And it is a small piece of it. It may not fulfill all of your respite needs, but this is something that can be done on a regular basis, and I encourage you, no matter where you are in your caregiving journey, that you start making time for this every single day. And that means whether you are just thinking right now, hey, I may have to be in a caregiver role at some point in my life, so I'm getting as much information right now as I can. It might be I've been caring for this person that I love for 20 years, and I feel like I have been running the same routine that whole time. It doesn't matter where you're at. I encourage you, if you are not doing this, to start it immediately and make it a habit. Informal respite is another kind of respite. So this is kind of like level 2. So this is working with your social connections and networks and having that support provided and stepped in by somebody who is perhaps not a formally paid respite. So this could be having an adult child, having a neighbor, maybe someone from your faith community, come and stay with an individual for, a few hours or even a day or two so that you can get out. Or even so that they can play cards or whatever with the individual you're caring for so you can do a load of laundry. Just something so that you can take a little bit of a break. This, of course, can look very different based on what your own community looks like. But it really is one way to start thinking about that if you're not necessarily in a place to start looking at formal respite at this point. Does anybody have anyone who provides some sort of that informal support to you? Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. And I encourage you to keep doing that. People don't necessarily think of that as respite. It's just, hey, I'm helping out mom, or I'm helping out my neighbor, or whatever. I have a lot of caregivers who will sometimes provide informal respite for each other. I shouldn't say I have a lot. I can think of a few. But they've made connections with each other, and so they'll say, all right, I'm bringing my veteran over to your house today. I'll play cards with both veterans so you can get out and get your hair done, and then tomorrow we'll swap. So that is one way to do it as well. And then formal respite is a lot of times what people think about when I say respite. Formal respite takes a lot of different forms, but this is really the provision of a short-term relief by some sort of paid care service provider. And that could be offered either in some kind of healthcare institution, like a long-term care facility or an adult day healthcare, something like that, or in the home. So adult day healthcare is an option, as I mentioned, where an individual actually goes to another location, has a great time socializing and spending time with people who are trained to provide that support and care to them, so that the caregiver has those hours off. Traditional home care would be having a skilled or non-skilled or companion care come in. So this could be a nurse if the healthcare needs are really high. It could be like a home health aide or a PCA. And that's having someone come into the home for, it could be short term, so just, maybe, could be some agencies are able to do overnight, so it might be able to be, a day if you're gonna be gone or a little bit longer. Or it could be you set something up so you have a few hours a week so that you can get away. And then there is institutional respite as well, which is when an individual would go into a nursing home or some kind of facility where they are cared for, usually for a minimum of a week. It kind of varies, again, by the agency who's providing that care, but usually a week or two minimum or longer, based on the need. So I see this used for a number of different reasons. VA, I will say, has a really good respite benefit. And so I see caregivers using this for a number of different reasons. They might need to take a week or two because they're traveling, or they're maybe having their own health procedure and they need some time to recover, or they just need 2 weeks to sleep. That happens too. So now that we know that we have all of these types of respite, it's important to start thinking about preparing for respite. And this is, I would say, really important to start kind of at the beginning of your caregiver journey if you are closer to the beginning. But you can start implementing this and having these discussions and considerations at any time. So I really encourage you to bring your community, your network of people that support and care for you into these conversations. And to start talking about respite and what that looks like. So a few strategies for talking about respite. Think about respite early and often and throughout your caregiving journey. So needs are going to change. You might be thinking about having somebody in the home for respite. And so you start with, your next door neighbor. Maybe the care needs change, and so you need to have a PCA come in. Maybe those care needs increase a little bit more, and you need to look at having a nurse come in. You need to be thinking about that and reevaluating it throughout the caregiving journey. It's important to educate your care partner and your support system about the benefits of respite. Now, if the person that you are caring for is at a point where they can still think about what and understand what respite is, then that's a really important conversation to start having so that you create a plan together about what respite is going to look like. Because it can be really challenging to all of a sudden out of the blue be like, I need a break, this is what's going to happen, and then discover that the person you're caring for is going to decline that. So it is important to start making that plan and thinking about that. It is also necessary to remember that we all need that respite. As I mentioned before, there's halftime at a football game, recess at school, personal time away from work. Remind yourself of that. If you need to write it down and stick it on your mirror in the bathroom, I need a break sometimes, do it. But keep that in your head because it can be very easy to forget. And it's also really normal to feel guilty about needing respite. You don't need to feel guilty, but it is normal. And so anticipate that guilt may be there. I talk to so many caregivers who wait for a very long time and finally take advantage of some respite, and the day comes perhaps that they're going to bring their loved one to the nursing home for a week of respite, and they say, I left there and I cried and cried because I felt so bad. And what I say is, that's normal. It doesn't mean that it's bad. You are so used to providing that care and oftentimes doing that primarily by yourself that you take on a lot of that responsibility, and giving that responsibility to somebody else for a period of time can be really hard. So, seek support when you need it. If you suspect in any way that you might have some guilt about using respite, have like a safety buddy, so to speak, another caregiver that you're talking to, maybe an adult child or a friend or a social worker or doctor, and help them, ask them to remind you why you're doing this, and that guilt is okay, but that you don't need to have it. Now, I did reference the caregiver respite tool that came in your bags. And this is a really cool thing, I think anyways, that VA created to help caregivers start thinking about respite. Because all of this stuff, even though I'm laying it out to you in a 45-minute presentation, it's complicated. I recognize that. And it's complex, and there are a lot of things that just are going to be really overwhelming sometimes when thinking about respite. So the caregiver respite tool is going to offer you a couple different things. It's going to help you recognize what your goal is going to be with respite. So a joy goal, what's going to bring you joy, as well as what is going to help you take care of yourself. It's going to help you have those kind of conversations, or even just think about what your internal supports are, what you have control over, what your strengths are, that can help you with this. It's going to help you identify what your signs of stress are. We went through that whole list and kind of, talked about some not so fun stuff right at the beginning of my presentation. But it is important to start recognizing what those signs are for yourself so that you can look at, I'm kind of getting closer to the end of my rope. I better get some support before I get to that end of my rope. It's going to help you identify your external support network and figure out how to ask for help. And then it's also going to kind of prompt you on how to seek information on some formal respite supports as well. So that copy is in there. If you need more copies, it is available free on the VA Caregiver website. I believe the website is actually on there. Otherwise, if you just go to VA Caregiver Support, if you Google that, you can find our site, and the VA Caregiver Support website is really good even if you're not caring for a veteran. There's lots of stuff on there. We do also have a new tool that's the Veterans Needs, and this helps you help others prepare for caring for your loved one. Again, says veteran, translatable to non-veterans. This is going to help you put together the information for your respite providers, whether they are formal or informal, about specific needs that your care partner has. Might provide special considerations for caring for the veteran, such as, they really like polka music, but if you put on country music, they're gonna really not be in a great mood. Or they love to play war with cards, but if you try to play Go Fish, they're gonna throw the cards up in the air. So this is something that obviously you would want to do with the individual that you're caring for if you can. Otherwise, just some observations that you can provide for others so that they can make respite as positive for that individual as possible. It also gives you spaces to provide information on emergency, information for them in emergency contacts. And this is really a good key for reducing stress and creating a plan. And it makes things easier for you, it makes things easier for the person you're caring for, and it makes things easier for the individual or agency that is going to be providing that care. This also is available for free on the VA Caregiver Support website. That is all I have formal for you today. I am happy to answer any questions if you have any. Or even just hear a little bit about anybody's experiences with respite or challenges that you have had. Yeah?
So all the other problems that the caregiver is facing don't go away. The caregiver not only carries the burden of caring for the person, their loved one with dementia, but the caregiver still has their son's getting a divorce and they're stressed by that. The caregiver still has to worry about paying the bills. Caregiver still has to worry about, are they going to cut Social Security? The caregiver still has all those other problems. And we're not really giving space for that in what we're saying here, but those problems don't go away.
Absolutely. If you weren't able to hear that, the comment is that this respite, we're talking, the conversation today is about providing support and providing relief specifically for the caregiving role. But other stressors, this isn't going to fix that, unfortunately. If you are caring for children, if you have family stressors going on, if you have financial stressors going on, those don't necessarily go away. However, I would argue that having some respite from your caregiving role can make some of those other things a little bit more manageable, because either you will have a bit more resilience and capacity to address those stressors, or you'll have a little bit of time to put effort into those things if you need it. Or all of these things, some of the informal or self-guided respite, is really helping, it's intended to help guide stress and wellness overall. Excuse me. So while nothing's going to go away, and this isn't specifically solving a problem, it is helping to create some resilience and ability to bounce back there.
My point was the person who's uncomfortable helping with respect to the dementia itself might help clean up the garden, take care of that worry off your plate.
Absolutely.
People are uncomfortable helping out with dementia. They don't like medical female or the medical issues or the male-female thing or whatever, but so they help with the garage, or they help put your boat away in the fall, or do some other task that takes that other thing off your plate.
Excellent point. Again, if you couldn't hear, the comment is that maybe respite isn't going to look like providing care directly to the individual that you are providing care for. If the care needs are too challenging or perhaps uncomfortable for some of your informal networks, or you're just not able to find somebody who says, yeah, I'm comfortable caring for that person while you are out, that you can look at other things that individual or individuals could perhaps support with, such as taking care of the yard or cleaning out the garage or any of those things, those additional roles or chores that you may have on there. You can always look at respite as support outside of the actual caregiving journey as well. Thank you, good point.
Could you flesh out the concept of self-compassion a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So self-compassion, I don't know, has a very specific definition, but what I'm talking about when I say self-compassion is your ability to be kind to yourself in regards to, specifically in this situation, specifically regarding caregiving. But one of the things that sometimes happens when we have increased stress or burnout is that negative lens that we are starting to see everything because of the stress gets turned on ourselves. And so creating and fostering self-compassion really is helping us learn to talk to ourselves more kindly about mistakes, about uncomfortable situations, about things that may not be going well or are really tough or difficult. It's giving ourselves that ability to be human and that's okay. And also to talk ourselves through and be supports for ourselves through those rough times. I hope that helps a little bit.
What are the obstacles to sensing self-compassion?
Obstacles to self-compassion. Well, I think humanity in itself, being human, is oftentimes in itself an obstacle to self-compassion. The stressors of caregiving in particular can be a barrier because we're often hearing you need to do more, right? What you're doing is not enough. Either that may be coming from ourselves, it may be coming from the person we are caring for, it may be coming from family members who are saying, why aren't you fixing this? Why aren't you going to the doctor more? It might be from the treatment team who's saying, hey, they should be eating a better diet when you're doing the very best that you can at home. So that could be a barrier in having those external sort of, you gotta do more. And trying to weed all of that out is part of self-compassion, figuring out what is reasonable for me to do. Okay, I'm getting the 5-minute sign.
Jeff,
Yes,
you and I have spoken because my husband's in daycare right now.
okay.
But I would just like to add to that. My daughter was at our home for about a week with some project that we were doing together, a sewing project. But she experienced then what was going on. And then she called me every day for about a week after. Mom, what are you doing for your... And that's the self-compassion thing, is take time. Just think about one thing that you're going to do just for you today.
Yes. Yep. If you weren't able to hear that, the comment is She had her daughter come to her home for a week to help with a different project, and her daughter was able to kind of experience what the caregiving situation was over that extended period of time. And afterwards, her daughter was really great about calling and following up and saying, all right, it's your daily reminder that you need to do something for yourself today. And so you had an informal respite person, part of your network, telling you got to take that self-guided respite. So that's a good combination there. Anything else? Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, everybody who is joining virtually as well. I appreciate your time, and I hope you will consider respite for yourselves in the future, and I'll see a lot more hands next time I ask.